What do you do when you realize that the girl your only brother is about to marry was the girl who had stolen your man? Let's dive into our story. Toby hadn't stepped foot in a church in what felt like forever. Work always seemed to get in the way of everything he did, and he was always busy. But today, his friend Obi wouldn't take no for an answer. Obi had practically dragged Toby out of his office chair, insisting that his church was holding a special praise night, and it would be good for Toby to get away from work for a while. Obi thought it was just what his friend needed, a chance to relax, unwind, and focus on something other than business for a change. Toby was the kind of person who barely had a moment to breathe. If he wasn't glued to his desk, typing away at his computer, he was rushing off to meetings or catching flights for business trips. Work was all he knew, and he didn't even take breaks for fun or to relax. But it wasn't because he wanted to. Life had really been tough on Toby. While he was just 15, his whole world turned upside down. His parents, who loved and cared for him and his younger sister Ola dearly, had died in a terrible accident. Suddenly, it was just him and Ola, left alone in the world to fend for themselves. The person who was supposed to take care of them, their aunt, didn't do what she promised. Instead of using the money meant for Toby and Ola's care, she spent it all on herself and her own family. Toby was left with hardly anything to take care of his sister or himself. He had to grow up fast, taking on responsibilities that most kids his age couldn't even imagine. He became both a brother and a parent to Ola, working hard to make sure she was okay. Toby was a bright, intelligent boy, full of dreams and hopes for the future. But when his parents died, everything changed. Toby had to make a tough decision. He dropped out of school, knowing that someone had to take care of his younger sister, Ola. He couldn't afford to keep them both in school, and in his mind, Ola's education was more important. She was the younger one and the only person he had left. So, with a heavy heart, Toby left his studies behind and took to the streets, doing any job he could find. At such a young age, Toby was already carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. From sweeping streets, to carrying heavy loads, to running errands for people. There was no job too small or too hard for him. He was determined to make sure they had at least food on their table and that Ola stayed in school. Even though life was tough, Toby never complained. People in the neighborhood admired him for his strength and determination. They saw how he worked tirelessly, always with a smile on his face. Despite everything he was going through, Toby remained kind, honest, and dedicated in all that he did. People couldn't help but love him. One day, as Toby was walking by a construction site near his home, he noticed that they were hiring workers. Desperate to earn more money, he decided to approach them, hoping they would give him a chance to work. But when he got there, the men at the site told him he was too young to do such hard labor. Toby, however, wasn't ready to give up. He pleaded with them, explaining how he needed a job to take care of his sister. The men were hesitant until the owner of the site, Mr. Jaja, arrived. When he heard what was happening, He looked at Toby closely and decided to give him a chance. That day, Toby worked harder than anyone else on the site. He carried heavy materials, moved faster than the other workers, and never once complained. Mr. Jaja couldn't take his eyes off Toby. He was amazed at the boy's strength and determination. For someone so young, Toby walked like a tiger, full of energy and focus. Mr. Jaja found himself coming to the site every day, not to monitor the job, but just to watch Toby. He couldn't help but smile as he saw the boy give his all, day in and day out. Toby reminded him of the son he never had. Mr. Jaja had been married for over 10 years, but he and his wife had never been able to have children. One evening, after the day's work, Mr. Jaja decided to sit down and talk to Toby. He wanted to know more about the boy who had captured his heart. As Toby shared his story, Mr. Jaja was both shocked and moved. He learned about how Toby's parents had died in a tragic accident, leaving him to take care of his sister all by himself. Toby explained that he had to even drop out of school so that his sister could continue her education, as there wasn't enough money to keep them both in school. As Toby spoke, Mr. Jaja felt tears welling up in his eyes. He had never met someone so selfless, someone so young but willing to sacrifice everything for his sister's future. Mr. Jaja knew in that moment that Toby deserved so much more. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy's bright future and how much potential he had. Toby wasn't just hardworking. He had a heart full of love and kindness. Mr. Jaja made a decision that would change both Toby and his sister's life forever. He decided to take them as his own children, to raise them and give them the opportunities their parents would have wanted for them if they were still alive. He knew it was what he had to do, and deep down, he felt like it was the start of something wonderful for all of them. Mr. Jaja and his wife were incredibly kind to Toby and Ola, treating them with the same love and care they would their own children. From the moment they took the siblings in, their lives changed for the better. Mr. Jaja was a wealthy man, and he made sure Toby and Ola went to the best schools. They never had to worry about the things they had once struggled with, like food, clothes, or where they would sleep. Toby and Ola were smart children, always doing well in school, and it didn't take long for their foster parents to be proud of their progress. They were no longer the struggling orphans they had been, but two young people with bright futures ahead of them. As time went on, Mr. Jaja and his wife were blessed with a daughter of their own. But even with their new baby, they never once treated Toby and Ola differently. To them, all three children were their own, and the love they had for the siblings never changed. Toby, in particular, grew very close to Mr. Jaja. Over the years, Toby grew from a determined young boy into a successful young man. His father trusted him so much that when Toby was old enough, he put him in charge of managing his vast business. Toby handled everything with skill and dedication, proving himself to be a hardworking and responsible young man. He was the kind of son any father would be proud of, and Mr. Jaja's heart was filled with love for him. To Mr. Jaja, Toby wasn't just an employee or even just an adopted son. He was the son he had always dreamed of. For Toby, Mr. Jaja was more than just a father figure. He was his savior. Toby knew that if it weren't for Mr. Jaja's kindness, himself and Ola might still be struggling. He owed everything to this man, and because of that, he was determined to make Mr. Jaja proud. He worked tirelessly, sometimes from morning until late at night, just to ensure that everything in the business was running smoothly. Toby was so focused on his work that he barely had time for anything else. At 30 years old, he wasn't even thinking about marriage or having a social life. This worried everyone around him, especially his parents and sister. They saw how much he was sacrificing and wanted him to take time for himself and find happiness. His parents had tried to set him up with different girls, but nothing ever worked. No matter how much they tried to introduce him to potential partners, Toby remained focused on his work, always promising he would think about it later. Even his sister Ola, who had spoken to him over and over again about how he needed to live a little, but Toby would just smile and give his usual promise that he would eventually settle down. In reality, Toby didn't have the heart to admit that he was afraid of failing Mr. Jaja or disappointing the man who had done so much for him. To him, making Mr. Jaja proud was all that mattered, even if it meant not having a life outside work. His friend Obi, however, wasn't going to let Toby keep living like this. Obi knew how hard Toby worked, but he also knew his friend deserved more. That's why that evening, Obi convinced Toby to come with him to church. He figured that maybe Toby might meet someone there, someone who could finally pull him out of his work-focused life and show him the importance of love and companionship. Obi knew that Toby needed balance, and if going to church helped him meet someone, then maybe it would be a step in the right direction. As Toby sat quietly in the church, the sound of the choir filled the air with beautiful, harmonious music. It was peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, Toby felt glad that he had listened to Obi and come along. He was enjoying the music, the calming atmosphere, and the chance to just sit and reflect. But then, something happened that caught him completely off guard. The moment a stunningly beautiful girl stepped onto the stage to sing, it felt as if the whole room paused. As soon as she opened her mouth and began to sing, her voice filled every corner of the auditorium. It was soft, yet strong, like nothing Toby had ever heard before. The power behind her voice sent chills down his spine, and he found himself completely mesmerized. Sitting in his seat, Toby felt his heart melt. Her voice was like magic, so sweet and so full of emotion that it felt like an angel had come down to sing just for him. He couldn't take his eyes off her. The way she moved so gracefully on stage, her poise, her confidence, it all captivated him in a way he couldn't explain. He had never been so drawn to someone before. It wasn't just her beauty, although she was undeniably beautiful. It was the way her voice seemed to reach deep into his soul. He couldn't even describe it. It was something beyond words. After the service, Toby couldn't shake her off his mind. The moment the service ended, he immediately turned to Obi, eagerly asking about the girl who had just sung. But to his disappointment, Obi didn't know much about her. All through the week, Toby found himself drifting into thoughts about her. He hadn't even had the chance to speak to her, but she occupied his thoughts constantly. Every conversation he had with Obi or anyone else somehow led back to her. At night, as he lay in bed, he would replay the moments she sang over and over in his head. The way her voice sounded, the way she looked under the soft light of the church. It was all he could think about. Before long, he made up his mind. He was definitely going back to church next Sunday. He had to see her again. When Sunday finally came, Obi couldn't stop teasing him as they drove to church. "So, you're actually leaving work and going to church because of the girl?" Obi laughed, giving Toby a playful nudge. "It's not like that," Toby tried to defend himself, though he couldn't help but laugh too. "I've just decided to be more serious with God, that's all." But the smile on his face gave him away. Sure, Obi grinned. "I'm just happy something has distracted you from work." "Let's just hope she's single," Obi said, winking at him. Toby's heart skipped a beat at that thought. He hadn't even considered that she might not be single. The possibility that someone else might already be in her life made his stomach twist in knots. As they drove, he silently prayed, hoping that she wasn't taken. When they arrived at the church, it didn't take long for him to spot her. There she was, looking as radiant as ever. She had the same kind, gentle expression on her face, and Toby couldn't help but stare. Her presence had the same effect on him as it did last week, and once again, he found himself wondering what exactly it was that drew him so much to her. Was it her graceful movements, her soft demeanor, or that unforgettable voice? Maybe it was all of it. Everything about her seemed perfect, and Toby couldn't get enough of just watching her. After the service, he waited patiently outside the church. He watched as she greeted people, her beautiful smile lighting up her face with every kind word she exchanged. She was warm, friendly, and seemed to connect with everyone she spoke to. His heart raced faster and faster as she slowly made her way through the crowd. His palms were sweating, and all the confident things he had planned to say disappeared from his mind in an instant. He had stayed up the night before, rehearsing lines in his head, imagining what he would say to her. But now, standing there, all those well-crafted lines flew right out of the window. As she finally walked out of the church, his heart pounded so loudly in his chest that he thought she might be able to hear it. She was coming his way, and in that moment, all he could do was smile nervously, unsure of what to say. He was angry at himself. "Shit," he muttered under his breath, frustrated that he couldn't think of anything clever to say. But then, something surprising happened. She walked directly towards him. His heart almost stopped. That was it, the moment he had been waiting for. "Hello," she greeted politely as she approached, her soft voice carrying a melody that seemed to dance in the air. The fresh floral scent that surrounded her filled the space, making everything feel lighter, like a gentle breeze had swept through the room. She smelled like fresh air, and her presence was as captivating as the songs she sang. Toby's heart skipped a beat as she came closer. "Hi," he managed to reply, though his voice trembled with nervousness. He wasn't used to feeling this way, but something about her made his confidence vanish. "You've been watching me all day," she said with a teasing smile, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Was there something on my face? Plus, I haven't seen you before here. Toby's face flushed red. He had been caught. Yes, he stammered, feeling a wave of embarrassment wash over him. He wasn't sure what she thought of him now, but he had to say something. Gathering his courage, though his words came out in a rush, he blurted, "I was here for the praise night last week, and I was staring at you because I like you." He immediately regretted how fast he said it, unsure of what and how she would react. She raised her eyebrows slightly, clearly surprised by his straightforwardness. "Oh, that was direct," she said, though she didn't seem upset. She was simply surprised. After all, she had just met him that afternoon. And here he was, admitting that he liked her without any hesitation. But her surprise quickly softened and she smiled again, her face warm and inviting. "My name is Emma," she said, extending her hand towards him. Her touch was light as she shook his hand. "I am Toby," he replied, finally starting to feel a bit calmer, though his heart was still racing. "Well, I will see you next Sunday," Emma said, turning to leave almost as quickly as she had appeared. Toby stood there, watching her walk away, his mouth opening up and closing, as he tried to think of something else to say. There were so many things he wanted to tell her, but nothing came out. He was stunned, caught in the moment. This was the first girl he had ever met who didn't seem overly impressed by him or threw herself at him. She was kind and graceful, but also mysterious, leaving him wanting more. As Toby and Obi drove home, Toby couldn't help but feel a bit sad. He had hoped to say more, to make a better impression, but the moment had slipped away. Obi noticed the change in his friend's mood and gave him a curious look. "What's wrong?" Obi finally asked. "Is she married?" Toby shook his head, sighing. "I don't think so, but I feel like I messed everything up. Firstly, she caught me staring at her the whole time, and then I just blurted out that I liked her. I don't think it was okay with her. She left so quickly and I didn't even get a chance to say anything else. Now, I'm worried about what she must think of me." Obi chuckled softly and patted his friend on the shoulder. "Relax. You were just being yourself. If she likes you, that won't scare her away. You didn't do anything wrong." Toby felt a bit calmer after hearing that. But as the days went by, his mind became more and more occupied with thoughts of Emma. He couldn't get her out of his head. Her smile, her voice, the way she carried herself. He found himself counting down to the days until Sunday, eager for the chance to see her again. This time, he promised himself he wouldn't let her leave so quickly. He would gather his courage, take his time, and make sure he really got to talk to her. He had to know more about the girl who had captured his heart so effortlessly. Toby came to church on Sunday, more prepared than ever. He had taken his time that morning, carefully choosing his best outfit and making sure he smelled great, thanks to a nice splash of cologne. He felt determined, though his heart still raced a little. He promised himself he wouldn't stare too much during the service this time. He was trying to keep his cool. As soon as the service ended, Toby knew it was time to act. Summoning all his courage, he walked up to Emma, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'll be outside, waiting," he said, his voice steady, though inside he was a bundle of nerves. "I would like to see you." Emma nodded, giving him that same sweet smile that made him feel a little more at ease. Toby waited outside, pacing a little and trying to calm himself down. He didn't want to seem too anxious, but the truth was, this moment meant a lot to him. Soon, he saw her walking towards him, just like before. Her presence had a calming effect on him. Her smile was warm and comforting, like a soft breeze on a hot day. "Hi, Toby. How are you today?" she greeted, her voice cheerful and kind. "I'm fine," he replied, feeling a bit more relaxed as they stood together. They found a quiet spot by the corner of the church, away from the crowd. As they settled into the conversation, Toby could still feel some nervousness bubbling inside him. Emma must have noticed because she began talking about simple everyday things. The weather, how the service had gone, and a few other light topics. Little by little, her casual tone and easygoing nature began to break the ice. Soon enough, they were both laughing together, and Toby found himself feeling much more at ease. He was no longer overthinking every word he said or worrying about how to impress her. It just felt natural to talk to her, and he realized how much he enjoyed being around her. After a few more minutes, Toby decided it was now or never. The atmosphere had cooled down, and he didn't want to miss his chance again. Taking a deep breath, he asked, "Emma, I was wondering, would you be free tonight for dinner? I would love to spend more time with you." For a moment, Emma looked at him with a playful smile, as if she could see right through his nerves. "Well, I did have a date planned with my bed this evening," she said with a grin. "But let's do dinner instead. I know it must have taken you a lot for you to ask." Her sense of humor made Toby laugh, and the tension that had been building up all day melted away in that instant. They both burst into laughter, and Toby couldn't help but admire how easy it was to talk to her. She had a way of making him feel comfortable, of keeping the conversation alive even when he thought he might stumble. As they wrapped up their conversation, Toby walked away from the church feeling like he was on top of the world. His heart was light and excitement bubbled into him. He couldn't believe it. He was actually going to have dinner with Emma. For the first time in a long while, Toby felt truly happy and excited about something outside work. That evening, Toby picked Emma up and they headed to his favorite restaurant. The atmosphere was cozy, and the scent of delicious food filled the air as they settled into their seats. From the moment they sat down, conversation flowed easily between them. As they ate, they talked about all sorts of things, sharing bits of their lives, their struggles, and their dreams. Toby learned that Emma, like him, was an orphan. She had faced so many hardships growing up, but she didn't let that stop her. She couldn't finish school because of financial challenges, but she had picked herself up, learned tailoring, and had become successful in her business. He was amazed by her resilience. The more he listened to her, the more impressed he became. She wasn't just beautiful on the outside. She was strong, hardworking, and determined. He liked her more and more with every word she spoke. There seemed to be nothing about her that didn't captivate him. They laughed, shared stories, and by the time their dinner was over, they had become much more than two people on a date. They had become friends. As the days passed, the connection between them grew stronger. They began to spend more time together, talking on the phone late into the night, or meeting up whenever they could. Toby couldn't stop thinking about Emma. She had quickly become his new addiction, someone he thought about every single minute of the day. He had never been in love before, and this new feeling overwhelmed him. Was this what he had been missing all along? It was exciting, thrilling, and comforting, all at the same time. Emma, on the other hand, had her own story. She had lost her fiancé to a terminal illness some time ago, and ever since, she had found it hard to open her heart to someone new. But Toby was different. There was something about him that made her feel safe, relaxed, and happy. Whenever she was around him, she admired his soft-spoken nature, the way he shyly looked at her and looked away whenever she caught him staring at her, and the way he always laughed at her jokes, no matter how silly they were. She could feel it. Toby was in love with her, and slowly she was beginning to fall for him too. As days passed, Toby couldn't get enough of Emma. Her presence brought him so much joy and peace. She was everything he didn't know he needed. Kind, soft, caring, and incredibly funny. He found himself thinking back to that day when Obi had convinced him to go to church. How grateful he was for that day. For if he hadn't gone, he would never have met Emma. She had quickly become the most important person in his life, and every time they were together, he felt like the luckiest man in the world. A few months into their blossoming relationship, Toby began to think seriously about the future. He knew in his heart that Emma was the one. She was everything he had ever dreamed of in a partner and more. There was no point waiting any longer. She brought so much light into his life, and he couldn't imagine spending his future with anyone else. Toby was sure he wanted to settle down with Emma. The thought of starting a life with her filled him with excitement, and he couldn't wait to take the next step. One sunny afternoon, Toby invited Emma over for lunch. They sat together, laughing and enjoying each other's company. As always, the food was delicious, but for Toby there was something much more important on his mind that day. As they finished eating, he took a deep breath, feeling his heart race, and then suddenly he got down on one knee. Emma's eyes widened in surprise as she watched him, her heart pounding with anticipation. "Emma," Toby said, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "Ever since I met you, my life had changed for good. I never felt love was really important. But since I met you, it just seems that I can't live without it anymore. I want to be with you now. I want to be with you always, and I want to be with you forever. Will you marry me?" Emma's face lit up with joy. She couldn't believe what was happening. Tears of happiness welled up in her eyes as she looked at the man who had brought so much love and peace into her life. Toby was the best thing that ever happened to her, and she knew she couldn't imagine her life without him. Without hesitation, she screamed, "Yes!" Her voice rang with excitement as she threw her arms around him. They embraced each other in that perfect moment, holding on tightly as they celebrated their love. Everything felt right, and their hearts were full of joy. When Toby shared the news with everyone that he was getting married, the reactions were priceless. Everyone was shocked but excited, especially Mr. Jaja and his wife, who had always wanted to see Toby settle down. They had watched him grow into a hard-working, caring young man, and now he was ready to start a new chapter in his life. Mr. Jaja beamed with pride. "I've seen the glow on your face lately, and I always knew it must be the work of a special woman. We're so happy for you, son," he said with a wide grin. "We would love to meet her whenever you're ready." His wife nodded in agreement, both of them thrilled that Toby had found someone who made him so happy. Ola, his sister, who now lived abroad, couldn't contain her excitement. When Toby told her the news over the phone, she screamed so loudly that he had to pull the phone away from his ear. "Finally, my brother is getting married," she shouted, her voice filled with joy. "Come on, tell me everything about her. How does she look? Is she beautiful?" Toby couldn't stop laughing at his sister's excitement. He was thrilled that his family was so happy for him and Emma. It felt good to know that everyone he loved was just as eager to welcome Emma into their lives. It was the beginning of a beautiful new journey for them both, and Toby couldn't wait to make Emma a permanent part of his world. The day finally arrived for Emma to meet the Jajas, and the excitement in the air was palpable. Toby was eager for his family to meet the woman who had stolen his heart. As they sat down for dinner, Mr. and Mrs. Jaja couldn't hide their delight. "Our son certainly has good taste," they said warmly, smiling at Emma as they ate. The evening flowed smoothly, and soon enough the room was filled with laughter. Emma, who had been nervous at first, found herself relaxing. The Jajas were kind and welcoming, so different from the stories she had heard about difficult in-laws. By the end of the night, she felt truly accepted, and her heart was light. After that, the wedding preparation swung into full gear. There was planning, shopping, and excitement all around. Everyone was thrilled for the big day, especially Ola, who was eagerly counting down the days until she could return to Nigeria. The thought of her brother getting married filled her heart with joy. Toby had sacrificed so much for her, and she wanted to be there for him on his special day. She promised herself that she would be the biggest support he had as he walked into this new chapter of his life. As the wedding drew nearer, Ola finally flew back to Nigeria. Toby and Emma were excited to welcome her at the airport. Toby and Ola were both so fond of each other, and Toby had missed her so much. He couldn't wait to see his sister again after 5 years. But as soon as Ola's eyes landed on Emma at the airport, everything changed. Her excitement vanished, and her entire demeanor shifted. Her smile disappeared, replaced by a look of cold shock. Was this the girl her brother was going to marry? No, it couldn't be. The excitement she had felt for weeks suddenly died in an instant. As they drove home from the airport, the tension in the car was thick. Toby tried to make conversation, asking his sister how her trip went, but every question was met with a short one-word answer. When he asked if everything was okay, Ola just nodded, but her face said otherwise. Toby knew something was wrong, but he decided not to press her for answers just yet. He would ask her privately once they got home. The drive was nothing like he had expected. Emma sat quietly, looking nervous and unsure. Ola's heart, on the other hand, was filled with rage. Toby was caught in the middle, confused and lost, unable to understand what was happening. Once they arrived home, Toby followed Ola into her room, determined to find out what was bothering her. "What's wrong?" he asked softly. "Is everything okay?" The response that came shocked him. "No!" Ola screamed, her voice shaking with anger. "Everything is not okay. Toby, you can't marry that girl. She is evil and I hate her so much." Toby stood frozen, stunned by her sudden outburst. "What? Ola, do you know her from somewhere?" he asked, struggling to comprehend why his sister was reacting that way. "Yes, Toby," Ola shouted, her face red with anger. "I know her. I know her better than you do. You see that girl? She is a green snake." Toby's head was spinning. "I don't believe you," he said. "I'm the one who chased after her. Emma has done nothing but bring love and joy into my life. If there's something you know, then tell me and stop beating around the bush." Ola's eyes filled with tears as she now spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. "That girl, she ruined my relationship with Fred, Toby. Did she tell you how she got the money to start her fashion business? She charmed Fred and turned him against me. She was his housemaid. Toby, that girl broke up my relationship. Fred left me for her, an ordinary housemaid, and then she killed him." Toby's heart dropped. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What are you talking about?" "Emma told me Fred died of a terminal illness," he said, trying to make sense of it all. "That's what she told you," Ola sobbed, her tears flowing freely. "But the truth is, she poisoned him. Fred was perfectly healthy when I was with him. She killed him, Toby, and now she's trying to worm her way into your life. I won't let her ruin you. You are the only brother I have." Toby's mind raced as he tried to process what his sister was saying. Could it be true? Everything he thought he knew about Emma was suddenly thrown into doubt, and he didn't even know what to believe. As he stood in the garden, his mind swirling with confusion, everything Ola had said replayed in his head, but deep down, he couldn't bring himself to believe it. Emma had always seemed so genuine, so kind. There was no way these terrible accusations could be true, right? He had to make sense of all of this, but it felt like he was caught between two worlds: his love for Emma and his loyalty to his sister. He had always known how deeply hurt Ola was when Fred had left her. But could it really be that everything Ola just said was the full truth? Emma had mentioned Fred before, but Toby never imagined it was the same Fred. His thoughts were a tangled mess when suddenly Emma's voice broke through the silence. "I've been searching for you all over the house. Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft with concern as she approached him in the garden. Toby looked at her, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He loved this woman so much, but now his heart was heavy with doubt. Gently, he took her hands in his and looked deep into her eyes. "Emma," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Can you tell me what happened with Fred? How you two met? I need to know everything." Emma's heart sank. She knew this moment was coming from the instant she realized that Ola, her greatest enemy from the past, was Toby's sister. She had tried to prepare herself for this, but now that the time had come, it didn't make it any easier. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her courage and began to speak. "Yes, I was his housemaid," she admitted. And then Ola was his girlfriend. She paused for a moment, her voice steady, but filled with truth. I knew she told you that I stole Fred from her. But that wasn't what happened. Fred loved Ola, but their relationship wasn't working. Ola was rude, disrespectful, and constantly insecure. She accused him of cheating all the time, even when he did nothing wrong. Their relationship was a battlefield, and Fred was exhausted from all the fighting. Emma's voice grew softer as she continued. Fred would confide in me about his problems with Ola, as it was deeply eating him up. I would listen and try to give him advice, but nothing ever seemed to help. Their relationship was falling apart on its own. Finally, Fred broke up with her, but I wasn't with him when they broke up. Toby, believe me, he only started dating after he ended things with Ola. She knows that, but she doesn't want to believe it. Toby could see the pain in Emma's eyes as she spoke, and it tugged his heart. He knew she was telling the truth. Ola didn't stop coming to the house, Emma continued, her voice shaking slightly. She was angry, and twice she even beat me up, accusing me of stealing Fred. But I never took him from her. Toby, I will never hurt anyone. Toby heaved a deep sigh, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He believed Emma. He had always known that Ola could be fiery and prone to overreacting, and what Emma described sounded all too familiar. But now, he was stuck in the middle of the situation that seemed impossible to resolve without hurting someone he loved. This had happened so long ago, and Ola needed to move on. His wedding was just days away, and this was the last thing he wanted to deal with. But now, he had to figure out how to handle the situation without letting it tear his family apart. I believe you, Emma, Toby finally said, his voice calm but firm. I know this isn't your fault, but now I have to talk to Ola and figure out how to fix this. I can't let this past ruin what we have. Emma nodded, her heart heavy but grateful that Toby trusted her. I understand, she said softly. I will give you the time to talk to her. It wasn't going to be easy, but Toby was determined to make sure that the love he shared with Emma didn't get destroyed by the past. Toby entered Ola's room and sat on her bed, his heart heavy. He knew this conversation wasn't going to be easy, but he just had to try. Taking a deep breath, he began softly. Ola, I have spoken to Emma, and I think you've misunderstood the whole situation. I just want you to let go of the past. I love Emma so much, and I want you to be a part of this. Besides, Fred is dead. But before he could finish, Ola's anger flared up like a storm. I knew it, she shouted, her eyes blazing. You're under her spell, Toby. That girl has charmed you, and you don't even see it. I know what I am talking about. Ola, please just listen, Toby tried to reason with her. But she cut him off, her voice rising in anger. No, Toby, she screamed. It's either me or that girl. I hate her, and I will never support this marriage. If you choose her, then you lose me. Remember all we've been through together. Toby felt a deep sadness wash over him. He knew there was no convincing her at this point. Without another word, he stood up and left the room, feeling defeated. He couldn't understand why Ola was holding onto this grudge so tightly. It had been 5 years since everything with Fred, and yet she was still so unforgiving. Toby loved Ola so much. It has always been the two of them, but this request of hers was just so difficult for him. Meanwhile, Emma was in the kitchen preparing dinner for the family, when suddenly Ola stormed in. Without a word, she grabbed a bowl of water and poured it straight into the pot of soup Emma was preparing. "What are you doing, Ola?" Emma screamed in shock, stepping back as the soup was ruined. "The last time you ever call my name with that useless mouth of yours," Ola spat venomously, "you will regret it. Call me Madam. That's what I am to you. Look at you, a maid like you." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. She couldn't believe the cruelty in Ola's voice. "Ola, I have done nothing wrong to you," she said, her voice breaking. "This is wickedness. Why are you doing this?" Ola's eyes narrowed. "When you stole Fred, what was that? When you charmed my only brother into falling for you, what was that? Tell me, who is the wicked one here?" she snapped. "Listen, if you know what's good for you, you better leave this house, because this marriage will never happen. I, Ola, will never let it happen." With that, Ola stormed out of the kitchen, leaving Emma standing there in shock. Slowly, Emma sank to the floor, her heart aching. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she wondered why all this was happening. Her wedding was just a few days away, and instead of joy, all she felt was sadness and pain. She hadn't done anything wrong, and yet Ola hated her so much. Emma wiped her tears and made a decision. She didn't want this bitterness to ruin everything, so she would apologize to Ola. Even if she wasn't at fault, she would do whatever it took to make peace, to stop this from getting in the way of her happiness. But when she tried to approach Ola, it only made things worse. Ola hurled hurtful words at her, calling her every name under the sun. She even threw things at Emma, forcing her to run out of her room to avoid getting hit. Emma felt like she was trapped in a nightmare. Ola was behaving like a completely mad woman. She had never seen so much hatred in someone's eyes before. Toby found Emma later, trembling and crying. He held her tenderly, whispering soothing words and promising her that things would be okay. "Ola will come around," he pleaded, though even he wasn't sure of that anymore. Emma wanted to believe him, but the pain was too deep. She made a difficult decision to stay at her own house until the wedding day. She couldn't endure this torment any longer, not with her wedding so close. As Emma left the house, she hoped that somehow peace would come before the wedding, but deep down, she feared that Ola's hatred would overshadow the joy of their special day. The wedding preparations, which were supposed to be filled with joy and excitement, now felt strange and awkward. The tension that Ola's hatred had brought loomed over everything, casting a shadow on what should have been the happiest day of Toby and Emma's life. But despite it all, the day of the wedding finally arrived. Emma was glad Toby had believed in her and stood by her all through this, but she couldn't shake the feeling of doubt gnawing at her heart. As she sat in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection in the beautiful wedding dress, she wondered if she was making the right choice. The dress was perfect, her makeup flawless, but something in her heart felt unsettled. Moments later, the car arrived to take her to the church, along with her chief bridesmaid. As they stepped out of the car and walked towards the church, she caught sight of Toby, standing at the altar. The huge smile on his face as he saw her made her momentarily forget everything. Emma looked stunning, and Toby's excitement was clear. His best man, Obi, stood next to him grinning from ear to ear. Everyone was happy. But as Emma walked down the aisle, just steps away from Toby, she felt a sudden touch from behind. Startled, she turned around, and before she could react, she felt cold liquid splash across her beautiful white dress. Red paint. Standing behind Emma was Ola, her face twisted with fury. "Yes, I warned you," she screamed, her voice filled with venom. "I will not only ruin your wedding, but your entire life if you don't leave my brother alone." Chaos erupted as people rushed to pull Ola away, restraining her as she continued to scream and struggle. "She's not good for you, Toby," she shouted as they dragged her out of the church, her voice filled with rage. "You will regret this. I will ruin her." Emma stood there frozen in place. Her dress, the beautiful white gown she had dreamed of wearing on her wedding day, was ruined. Red paint dripped down her skirt, staining everything. Her heart sank as tears filled her eyes. This was not the wedding she had dreamed of. The pain in her chest was overwhelming, and in that moment she felt like everything had fallen apart. The weight of Ola's actions crushed her, and she couldn't see how she could possibly go on with the ceremony. With tears streaming down her face, Emma lifted her dress and began to run. She couldn't do this. She couldn't push through with the wedding, not with Ola's hatred looming over her. It was too much. Ola wasn't going to stop until she destroyed everything Emma held dear. The fire in Ola's eyes terrified her. But as she ran, a firm hand caught her, pulling her back. It was Toby. "Let me go," she cried, trying to pull away from him. "No, Emma," Toby said, his voice filled with desperation. "You can't do this. You can't leave me standing at the altar. Please, let's fight for the love we share." "I can't, Toby," she sobbed. "Not with your crazy sister lurking around, ready to ruin everything. She ruined my dress, Toby. You heard her. She's not going to stop. Her heart is full of hatred." Toby's eyes were filled with sorrow, but he wouldn't let go. He dropped to his knees in front of her, holding her tightly. "Please, Emma, for my sake, we can make this work. Don't let her win. If you leave, I don't know if I would ever find happiness again. You are my everything." At that moment, Emma's chief bridesmaid rushed to her side. "Emma," she pleaded, "you can wear my dress, but please, don't let this ruin your day. Don't let her win. Fight for your love." Emma stood there, her heart torn between pain and love. She looked at Toby, his eyes filled with such vulnerability, and her own heart broke. She couldn't bear to see him like this. He had fought so hard for their love, and now, even in the face of everything Ola had done, he was still fighting. She realized that this was the man she loved, the man who had promised to stand by her. Tears still streaming down her face, Emma knelt down and embraced Toby, holding him tightly. She cried her heart out, but she knew in that very moment that she would not leave him. She wouldn't let Ola's bitterness destroy what they shared. "I'm not leaving you," Emma whispered through her tears. "I will stay, and I will fight for us, no matter what Ola does. We will face it together." Toby held her close. "We lived beyond words. Emma's chief bridesmaid helped her stand and began arranging her dress. "We need to hurry," she said. "The priest is waiting." Their wedding ceremony went perfectly well after that. And then Emma moved in with her husband. They both loved each other so much, and everything was going on perfectly well. With the whole chaos of the wedding day now shoved aside, Emma was a very kind woman whose only joy was to see her husband constantly happy. They lived on happily together, as if nothing had ever happened. For weeks, no one heard a word from Ola. Her phone was unreachable, and no one knew where she had gone. At first, everyone was angry with her, even their parents, who had raised her with so much care. They couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong. They had tried their best to raise her properly, but somehow Ola had grown into someone they couldn't recognize. She was arrogant, rude, and full of pride. Whenever she got angry, it was like a fire that no one could put out. Sometimes they wondered if they had spoiled her with too much when she was younger, giving her everything she wanted and never saying no. Maybe that was why she had turned out the way she did. But as the days turned into weeks, their anger began to change. Worry started to replace the frustration they felt. Where was she? Why hadn't she called? What if something had happened to her? They didn't know what to think. No one had any information about her whereabouts, and with each passing day their fear grew. Then, one Friday evening, just as the sun was setting, Toby was sitting by the pool with his wife, Emma, enjoying the calmness of the evening. The soft breeze carried the scent of flowers from the garden, and for a moment everything felt peaceful. But that peace shattered the second they saw Ola walking into the compound. The sight of her immediately filled Emma with anger. All the painful memories of their ruined wedding day came rushing back to her. What was she doing here, Emma thought, her heart pounding with frustration. As Ola walked closer, both Toby and Emma noticed something strange. The usual arrogance that Ola carried with her was gone. She didn't look proud or angry. In fact, she looked nothing like the strong fairy person they were used to seeing. Ola looked broken. All the energy she used to have seemed to have vanished. When she finally reached them, she didn't say a word. She just fell to her knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Toby. I'm sorry, Emma," she cried, her voice trembling with guilt. "Please, find it in your heart to forgive me. I didn't mean to ruin your wedding. I had let my emotions get the best of me. And I'm so sorry." Tears continued to roll down her face as she begged for forgiveness. Emma stood there, staring at Ola. The anger that had been burning inside her began to fade. She was soft-hearted, and seeing Ola in such a vulnerable state filled her with pity. Toby was watching Emma closely, waiting to see how she would react. After a few moments, Emma took a deep breath and turned to her husband. "What do you think?" "I feel she's truly sorry," she said quietly. "I forgive her. She's your sister after all." Toby nodded. If Emma was willing to forgive, then so was he. Together, they welcomed Ola into their home, and the rest of the night passed peacefully. Later that night, Toby sat down with his sister. There were things he needed to say, feelings he had kept bottled up for too long. "You know, Ola, you really hurt me and Emma," he began, his voice soft but serious. "You almost ruined our life." Ola's eyes filled with fresh tears as she listened to her brother. "I know, Toby. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know I'm not perfect, but I loved Fred so much. Yes, we had our fights, but he meant the world to me." When Emma came into the picture, everything changed. Fred became so fond of her. He was always talking to her and talking about her. And we started fighting even more. Eventually, he stopped taking my calls and broke up with me. You know, Fred used to be my everything, Toby. And then he started dating Emma. It felt like she took him away from me. Ola's voice cracked as she continued. "No man has ever approached me since then. Fred was the one person who made me feel special. And when he left, it broke me." Toby felt a wave of sadness for his sister. He could see how deeply she had been hurt, even if her actions had been wrong. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a tight hug. "It's okay, Ola," he said gently. "I feel your pain, and know this, I will always be here for you. You are my only sister, and I will always care for you no matter what." Ola smiled through her tears, but deep inside, her heart was filled with a different emotion. She knew that gaining her brother's trust was the key to her plans. The following morning, Emma was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when Ola entered the room. Emma greeted her warmly, hoping to continue the peace they had made the night before. "Hi, Ola," she said with a smile. "Hope you slept well." Emma was ready to build a positive relationship with Ola. After all, they were now family. But Ola's next action left her in complete shock. "I need a hot plate of jollof rice," Ola demanded, completely ignoring Emma's greeting. Her tone was cold and she acted as if Emma hadn't spoken to her at all. Emma stood there, stunned. Hadn't they made peace the last night? She thought. Still, Emma decided to make the rice, thinking maybe Ola was still adjusting to the situation. She didn't want to cause any trouble, especially since Ola was a guest in their home. But that was only the beginning. Over the next few days, it became clear that Ola wasn't sorry for anything. In fact, she seemed determined to make Emma's life miserable. It was as if the apology from the night before had been nothing but a trick to get into their home. Ola had promised on Emma's wedding day to ruin her life, and it was becoming obvious she intended to keep that promise. At first, Emma tried to handle Ola's behavior on her own. She knew how hard Toby worked and she didn't want to bother him with the situation. Ola was always on her best behavior when Toby was around, so he had no idea what was going on. Emma thought she could manage, but things only got worse. Ola did everything in her power to make Emma's life difficult. She would sneak into the kitchen and add too much salt or pepper to Emma's food whenever she finished cooking, making it almost inedible. Toby would frown in disappointment when the meal tasted bad, and Emma would sit there confused and hurt, trying to defend herself. She knew it was Ola's doing, but she stayed silent, hoping her patience and kindness would eventually change Ola's heart. But instead of getting better, Ola's behavior grew worse with each passing day. As Ola would lay on the bed every night, her heart was constantly filled with bitterness. Ever since her relationship with Fred ended, no man had ever approached her. And here was Emma, who had quickly moved on from Fred after his death, and it pained her so much to see how her brother adored her. She was going to frustrate Emma until she left her brother. Whenever Emma finished cleaning the house, Ola would litter the ground with dirt and stains, doing everything to frustrate her in her own home. Emma tried her best to ignore it, but Ola's wickedness was relentless. One day, after Emma had spent hours preparing a special dinner for her and Toby's 1-month wedding anniversary, she decided to take a quick bath before serving the meal. But when she returned to the kitchen, her heart sank. The food she had worked so hard on was gone. What had happened to the food, she thought. She stepped outside. Could it be that Ola had thrown the food into the bin? But what she even saw was more shocking. Ola had given the food, the entire meal, to the dog. Emma stood there stunned. Tears filled her eyes. This was a special dinner she had prepared for their anniversary, and now it was ruined. She couldn't believe Ola could go this far. She retreated to her room, heartbroken. As she sat on her bed, tears streamed down her face, wondering how she was going to survive living under the same roof as Ola. When Toby came home, he found his wife sitting on the bed, her face streaked with tears. He rushed to her side, concerned. "Emma, is something wrong?" Toby asked, his voice filled with worry. "Yes, Toby. Everything is wrong," Emma cried, her emotions spilling out. "When is Ola leaving? I thought she had only arrived for the wedding. But she's still here, making my life miserable." Toby looked at his wife confused. "I think she wants to settle down here," he said. "She left the country after her breakup with Fred and says she wants to stay in Nigeria now. Is there a problem?" Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. "A problem?" she exclaimed. "Toby, I can't put up with her anymore. Ever since she came here, she's been a thorn on my flesh. I've tried to love her, but she's just impossible to deal with. She ruined our anniversary dinner. Toby, she gave the food I made to the dog. What have I done to deserve this?" Toby held his wife, trying to comfort her. "I'm sorry, Emma. I didn't know it was this bad," he said. "We can eat out tonight, okay? Ola has been through a lot. She just needs our love and care to heal." Emma pulled away, looking at him in disbelief. "What? Toby, she hurts me every single day on purpose. And this is all you have to say? How about me? Haven't I been through enough? Did you even care about what I'm going through?" Toby was at loss for words, stammering as he tried to respond. "No, Emma, that's not what I mean. I'm just..." Emma shook her head, heartbroken. This was not the support she had hoped to get from her husband. How long was she expected to put up with Ola's cruelty? Toby's love for his sister was blinding him to the pain his wife was enduring. As the weeks went by, nothing changed. Ola's behavior grew worse, and Toby remained too weak to confront his sister. Emma realized she was on her own. If Toby couldn't stand up to Ola, then she would have to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't let Ola destroy her peace any longer. One morning, Emma was in the kitchen, finishing up lunch. She worked hard preparing a nice meal and then served it on the dining table, hoping for a quiet day. A little while later, Ola came downstairs to eat. She sat at the table, scooped a spoonful of food into her mouth, and suddenly began screaming. My mouth! My mouth is burning!" Ola yelled, clutching her face in pain. Hearing the commotion, Emma rushed out of the kitchen, her heart pounding. She couldn't understand what was wrong, but before she could ask, Ola stood up, grabbed the plate of food and flung it across the room, hurling it at Emma with all her strength. "You want to poison me, right?" Ola shrieked at the top of her voice. "What kind of rubbish food is this?" Emma was frozen in shock. She hadn't done anything wrong. What was Ola talking about? But before she could even open her mouth to defend herself, Ola rushed to her side and slapped her hard across the face. The sting was immediate, and Emma felt her skin burn from the impact. "Maid! Man-snatcher!" Ola screamed, her eyes wide with anger. This was the moment Emma snapped. All the moments of enduring Ola's wickedness came flooding back to her in that instant. Every insult, every cruel act, every time she had tried to ruin her happiness. Emma had been patient for far too long, but this was the last straw. She wasn't going to take it anymore. Without thinking, Emma marched to the door, locked it, and turned back to face Ola. Enough was enough. The rage in Emma's heart boiled over as she charged at her. She didn't care anymore. She gave Ola a beating she would never forget, delivering one punch after the other, each blow fueled by pain. The pain Ola had caused her. Ola screamed for help, but no one was there to rescue her. Emma continued until she was satisfied. When she was done, she stood over her breathless. With a cold eyes, Emma commanded, "Now, tidy up this house. All of it." Ola, terrified in pain, scrambled to her feet. She had never imagined that Emma, the woman she thought was so soft and weak, could ever fight back like this. Trembling, Ola did as she was told, cleaning up every inch of the house in silence. The entire time, she couldn't believe what had just happened. Emma had stood up to her, something she never thought was possible. After the beating, Ola sat outside the house waiting for Toby to come home. Her body ached and her eyes was already swollen. She couldn't think straight. When Toby finally arrived, he was immediately alarmed. It was unlike his sister to sit outside like that. And as he got closer, he noticed the black eye and bruises covering her arms and face. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. Is that witch inside?" Ola stammered, struggling to find her words. Toby's concern quickly turned into anger. His mind raced. Emma had hit his sister without waiting to hear the full story. His temper fled. How dare Emma lay hands on Ola without telling him first? "Emma! Emma!" he shouted as he stormed into the house, his voice shaking with fury. When he found Emma, his eyes were full of rage. "How dare you touch my sister?" he shouted, glaring at her. "What gives you the right to hit her?" Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. She stood there in shock, staring at the man she had married. So Toby could scream and shout, yet all those times his sister had bullied and humiliated her and made her life miserable, he had remained silent. Now he wanted to defend his sister. Emma realized in that moment just how weak Toby really was. He had allowed Ola to torment her without lifting a finger to protect his wife. She should have known all along. This wasn't the life she wanted. From the moment she married Toby, she had barely known peace. She had done everything to keep her marriage strong. But she was tired. She was done being treated like a piece of rag by both Toby and his sister. Early the next morning, before anyone woke up, Emma quietly packed her things. She wasn't going to live like this anymore. She had tried everything, but enough was enough. With one last glance at the house she had hoped to become a loving home, Emma walked out of the door. She was leaving for good. Finally, Ola could have her way. If she wanted to get married to her brother, she could do it without Emma. All Emma wanted now was peace, and she was determined to find it elsewhere. When Toby woke up that morning, the first thing he noticed was that Emma wasn't in bed. His heart sank. He had gone to sleep angry the night before, but now that his anger had cooled, he began to regret how he had reacted. He knew he had overreacted. With a growing sense of unease, he searched the entire house, every room, every corner, but Emma was nowhere to be found. As he left for work that morning, Toby hoped that by the time he returned, Emma would be back. Maybe she had just needed some time to cool off. But when he got home later that evening, Emma wasn't still there. The house felt emptier than ever before. Days passed and Toby's worry turned into a heavy realization. Emma had left him. He tried calling her, but her phone was off. He couldn't reach her and the silence was driving him crazy. Every day without her felt like a lifetime, and the more time passed, the more he realized how deeply he had hurt her. Meanwhile, Ola was thrilled. Emma had finally left, just as she had wanted all along. In her mind, she had won. Toby was hers again, without Emma in the picture. But as the days turned into weeks, Ola began to realize that Toby was falling apart. Without Emma, Toby's life was spiraling out of control. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep, and he couldn't concentrate at work. Everything felt wrong. His world had become a mess without Emma by his side. His temper grew short, and he found himself screaming at people at the office, irritated by the smallest things. It was clear to everyone around him that something was terribly wrong. His father, noticing the toll it was taking on him, decided to step in. He gave Toby some time off from work, hoping it would help him pull himself together. His father knew exactly what had happened between Toby and Emma. Emma had confided in him before she left, explaining how hurt she was by Ola's constant cruelty and how Toby had failed to stand up for her. Toby's father told him plainly, "Son, you need to grow up. You are now a family man, and you can't let anyone destroy your home, not even your own family." Toby couldn't stop thinking about it. His father's word repeated in its heart all through the day, and he knew his father was right. His thoughts kept circling back to the truths he had been avoiding. His inability to protect the woman he loved was the reason Emma had left. Emma was a good woman, and he had failed her. Right now, he needed to stand up for her. One morning, as Toby sat silently, lost in his thoughts, Ola came to sit beside him. She was smiling, still believing everything was going her way. "Toby, I think it's time you got over Emma and moved on," she said, her voice dripping with arrogance. "There are so many other women who would throw themselves at you. I don't understand what you saw in that maid." Toby remained quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything Ola had done. The silence hung heavy in the air. Finally he spoke, his voice low but firm. "Ola, this is my home," he said. "I know you have the money to get your own place. It's time for you to leave." Ola was taken back. "You're driving me out of your house. Your only sister?" she asked, shocked that Toby was speaking to her this way. "Leave," Toby said, this time with more force. "And if you can't let go of this stupid grudge, then I don't ever want to see you near my family again." Ola was stunned. She had never seen her brother this angry before. His voice was sharp, his words cold, and the look in his eyes made it clear that he meant every word. For the first time, she felt truly frightened. She had pushed too far. And now her brother, the only person she thought would always side with her, was casting her out. Toby wasn't going to let anyone or anything keep him from finding Emma. He had finally realized what he needed to do. And if there was any hope of getting her back, then he needed to do the right thing. He won't stand by and watch his sister ruin their happiness. With the help of Mr. Daja, Toby finally found Emma. The moment he saw her, his heart ached with regret, and immediately he began pleading. "Please, Emma, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice filled with guilt. "I let my sister come between us, and I can't believe I was so blind. It took your absence for me to realize that I can't do anything without you. I was wrong, and I'm ashamed of myself. Ola is no longer in our house, and I promise I won't ever allow her or anything come between us again." Mr. Jaja, standing by his side, joined in, begging Emma to forgive Toby. Emma stood there, her eyes brimming with tears as she listened. She had been through so much, and though she still loved Toby, the hurt was hard to ignore. But seeing him there, truly remorseful, touched her deeply. "Are you promising this, Toby?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I just want to be happy." Toby didn't hesitate. He wrapped her in a warm embrace. "I promise, Emma. I promise with all my heart." Tears flowed from both of them, and in that moment they reconciled. Their love, tested by pain and betrayal, had survived. They drove back home together, hand in hand as husband and wife, vowing that nothing and no one will ever come between them again. While Toby and Emma had found their way back to each other, Ola was now in her own world of turmoil. For days, she had been unable to reach her brother. Toby had completely cut her off, refusing to speak to her after everything that happened. Deep down, Ola knew she had gone too far. She had betrayed her brother's trust a second time. For the first time, she allowed herself face the truth. She knew Emma was a good woman, and the bitterness she carried wasn't Emma's fault. It had never been about Emma stealing Fred. No, Emma had never stolen Fred. Fred had fallen for Emma because she had all the qualities Fred had wanted in a woman. Ola was jealous. Jealous that Fred saw in Emma what he could never see in her. And that jealousy had filled her heart with hatred, poisoning her thoughts and actions. Now, watching her brother give Emma the love and affection she had always longed for only deepened the hurt she felt. Tears welled up in Ola's eyes. She realized it was time to let go of the bitterness and hatred she had been holding onto for years. The truth was, Emma wasn't the problem. She was. Ola knew she needed to change, to free herself from the heavy burden of jealousy that had controlled her life. Now, Ola felt ready to seek for forgiveness. She decided that she would genuinely ask Emma for forgiveness, not just for what she had done to her, but for how she had let her own insecurities destroy everything. And more than that, she wanted to learn from Emma. She wanted to understand what made Emma stand out. What made men, especially Fred and Toby, love her so deeply. This wasn't about charm. There was something real and good in Emma that Ola wanted to learn for herself. She was determined to be a better person. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to try. And with a hopeful heart, she prepared herself to seek Emma's forgiveness and to begin her journey towards becoming the kind of woman she had always wanted to be. Hey besties, thank you for watching this amazing story, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed making it. I would like you to drop your lessons in the comment section. And if you are yet to subscribe to our channel and you enjoy our stories, please do not forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so that you get notified whenever we post new stories. Thank you so much for your amazing support. You guys are just the best, and I can't just thank you enough. Thank you so much. Right now, I'll have to go and see you in the next story. Bye!